Have you ever wondered if humanity wasn't the only kind of human to walk this earth? Not long ago, our world was shared with other human species, beings who hunted, survived, dreamed, and built lives just as we did. Yet today, every one of them is gone. They didn't simply disappear from history. They vanished from our very bloodline, leaving behind only scattered bones, mysterious caves, and a handful of ancient DNA. Who were these lost humans? Why did they disappear while we survived? And could traces of them still be hiding within us? Tonight we're uncovering one of the greatest mysteries of human history, the lost humans who vanished from our bloodline. But before we begin, if you enjoy exploring ancient mysteries, forgotten civilizations, and the hidden story of our origins, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. It truly helps us create more documentaries like this. Now let's travel back hundreds of thousands of years to meet the humans history almost forgot. Long before the first cities rise from river valleys, before pyramids cast their shadows across the desert, and long before written history begins recording the names of kings, another world exists almost entirely beyond memory. It is a world where modern humans are not alone. Across vast plains, frozen valleys, dense forests, and forgotten coastlines, different kinds of humans walk beneath the same sky. Some leave footprints beside mammoths, others master icy mountains that seem impossible to survive. Some disappear so completely that only fragments of bone and invisible traces inside modern DNA reveal they were ever here at all. Today it is easy to imagine humanity as a single, uninterrupted story leading steadily toward the present. Yet the deeper archaeologists dig into caves and ancient sediments, the stranger that story becomes. The evidence no longer points toward a lonely climb from primitive beginnings to civilization. Instead, it reveals an ancient family unlike anything most people once imagined. For hundreds of thousands of years, Earth is home to several human species living at the same time, each adapted to different environments, each carrying its own history, and each facing the same unpredictable planet. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The mystery begins not with what survives, but with what disappears. Modern humanity often sees itself as the inevitable winner of evolution, the single successful outcome of millions of years of change. Yet nothing in the prehistoric record suggests that survival is ever guaranteed. Evolution does not work toward perfection. It responds to changing landscapes, shifting climates, and endless accidents. Entire branches flourish for hundreds of thousands of years before quietly fading away. Others leave behind descendants. Still others vanish so completely that scientists only recognize their existence through advances in genetics made within the last few decades. Standing in an ancient valley nearly 100,000 years ago would offer a view almost impossible to recreate today. The landscape might appear familiar enough. Herds of wild horses move across open grasslands. Woolly rhinoceroses browse nearby. Great cats patrol rocky ridges while enormous birds circle overhead. Yet the most remarkable sight would not be the animals. It would be the people. Not all of them look exactly alike. Some are taller and more slender, built for warmer climates and longer journeys. Others possess powerful shoulders, broad chests, and compact bodies shaped by generations of life in freezing environments. Faces vary, brows differ, limbs reveal different evolutionary histories. Their tools resemble one another in some places, yet differ dramatically in others. Fire burns in multiple camps, separated by only a few valleys. To modern eyes, every one of them would still appear unmistakably human. For generations, textbooks present human evolution as a simple ladder. One ancestor supposedly transforms into another, until finally modern humans emerge at the top. It is an appealing picture because it feels orderly. Each species replaces the previous one in a clean sequence, almost like stepping stones across time. Reality proves far messier. The evidence uncovered during the last half-century replaces that ladder with something resembling a dense tree, whose branches continually divide, overlap, reconnect, and sometimes disappear altogether. Some branches remain isolated for hundreds of thousands of years. Others encounter distant relatives after unimaginable spans of separation. Some exchange genes before vanishing forever. Others continue evolving independently until environmental changes erase entire populations. The human family is not a straight line. It is a forest. Many of those branches never survive long enough to leave living descendants. Others survive only as faint echoes hidden inside the genomes of people alive today. The farther researchers push back into prehistory, the more crowded that forest becomes. Even defining the word human grows increasingly difficult. Scientists generally place members of the genus Homo within a broader evolutionary story beginning millions of years ago in Africa. Over immense stretches of time, changing climates repeatedly transform forests into grasslands and then back again. Lakes appear before disappearing. Rivers alter their courses. Animal populations migrate, adapt, or become extinct. Every environmental shift creates new opportunities while eliminating others. Within this unstable world, multiple human forms emerge. Some possess larger brains than earlier ancestors. Others develop more efficient ways of making stone tools. Fire gradually becomes a reliable companion. Hunting techniques improve. Cooperation expands. Knowledge begins passing more effectively between generations. None of these developments occur everywhere at once. Innovation spreads unevenly across continents carried by migration isolation and countless local adaptations. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that prehistoric humanity spends far more time adapting than advancing in any simple direction. Periods of remarkable stability often last tens of thousands of years. Entire populations' perfect ways of living within familiar environments, only to confront sudden climate shifts that transform everything. Coastlines disappear beneath rising seas. Productive grasslands become deserts. Frozen landscapes thaw while forests spread into former hunting grounds. Every generation inherits a world slightly different from the one before. Against this constantly changing backdrop, survival depends less upon superiority than flexibility. That realization changes the entire story. Modern humans do not emerge into an empty world waiting to be occupied. They enter a planet already inhabited by relatives with their own long histories. Some have survived harsh winters for hundreds of millennia. Others know mountain landscapes better than any newcomers possibly could. Certain populations understand local plants, seasonal migrations, dangerous predators, and hidden water sources accumulated through countless generations of experience. They are not primitive obstacles standing in history's way. They are successful humans by every meaningful measure of survival. And yet, despite their remarkable resilience, something eventually changes. One by one, these ancient relatives disappear. Some vanish gradually over thousands of years, leaving only scattered campsites buried beneath layers of sediment. Others seem to fade rapidly from particular regions before surviving elsewhere for surprisingly long periods. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate exactly how many separate human groups once shared the Earth. Every new excavation has the potential to redraw the family tree once again. Perhaps the greatest surprise is how recent many of these disappearances truly are. There is no immense gulf separating modern humanity from its lost relatives. In evolutionary terms, some of them live almost yesterday. Had history unfolded only slightly differently, the world today might contain more than one surviving human species. The idea sounds extraordinary, yet it remains firmly grounded in archaeological discoveries, fossil evidence, and ancient DNA recovered from caves that preserved secrets for tens of thousands of years. The silence surrounding these vanished people is not evidence that they were insignificant. It is simply the consequence of time. Bones decay. Camps vanish beneath forests. Rising seas swallow ancient coastlines where generations once lived. Wind erases footprints almost as quickly as they are made. Memory itself disappears long before writing ever exists to preserve it. What remains are fragments. A broken tooth, a weathered skull, a chipped stone blade, a strand of genetic inheritance carried unknowingly inside billions of living people. Together they tell an astonishing story that is only beginning to emerge, revealing that humanity's past is far larger, stranger, and more crowded than anyone imagined only a generation ago. The deeper the search reaches into prehistory, the less familiar the ancient world becomes. Instead of a single expanding population gradually conquering the planet, the evidence reveals a mosaic of human communities scattered across continents, each following its own evolutionary path. Their lives unfold over spans of time so immense that entire mountain ranges slowly erode, while these populations continue adapting to the places they call home. Humanity is never a solitary species moving confidently towards civilization. For much of its existence, it belongs to a crowded family. Nearly 2 million years before the present members of the genus Homo begin spreading beyond Africa, in waves that remain only partly understood. Some migrations leave descendants whose fossils appear thousands of kilometers apart. Others vanish so completely that only isolated discoveries hint they ever happened. The archaeological record resembles a damaged manuscript with entire chapters missing. Scientists reconstruct the story from scattered clues, knowing that every new fossil has the potential to rewrite long-accepted ideas. Africa remains the great center of human evolution throughout much of this immense timescale. Its landscapes are astonishingly varied. Tropical forests stretch across equatorial regions while vast grasslands open farther east. Mountain chains create cooler refuges. Lakes expand and contract as rainfall patterns shift. During wetter periods, rivers connect habitats that later become isolated when drought returns. These changing environments encourage populations to separate, adapt locally, and occasionally reconnect after thousands of generations apart. Isolation becomes one of evolution's most powerful forces. When groups remain separated by deserts, glaciers, dense forests, or enormous distances, small differences slowly accumulate. Generation after generation, bodies respond to local conditions. Hunting strategies evolve according to available prey. Stone tools reflect nearby raw materials. Even the timing of seasonal movement changes depending on climate. None of these differences appear dramatic within a single lifetime, yet over hundreds of thousands of years they shape distinct human populations. Far to the north, colder climates reward compact bodies that conserve heat. Powerful muscles become valuable for close-range hunting in rugged terrain. Large noses may help warm freezing air before it reaches the lungs. Thick animal hides become essential rather than optional. Survival demands intimate knowledge of landscapes where winter dominates much of the year. Elsewhere, warmer climates favor different adaptations. Longer limbs help release body heat more efficiently. Seasonal migrations follow shifting herds across broad savannas. Rivers become predictable pathways linking distant communities. Coastal environments provide fish, shellfish, and other dependable food sources that reduce reliance on dangerous hunts. No single lifestyle defines humanity. Every environment encourages its own solutions. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that these populations are remarkably capable. For many years, popular imagination portrays ancient human relatives as crude cave dwellers, living short, brutal lives with little understanding of their surroundings. Modern research paints a far richer picture. Even hundreds of thousands of years ago, Many human groups demonstrate sophisticated planning. They carefully select stones suitable for making durable tools. Some transport valuable raw materials over considerable distances rather than settling for inferior local rock. Campsites reveal repeated seasonal occupation, suggesting familiar migration routes remembered across generations. Fire transforms nearly every aspect of survival. Its controlled use provides warmth protection from predators, improved nutrition through cooking, and light during long nights. Around ancient hearths, knowledge passes from experienced adults to younger generations. The archaeological record cannot preserve spoken language, but it strongly suggests that increasingly complex communication accompanies increasingly complex societies. Coordinated hunting, careful toolmaking, and long-term cooperation become difficult without effective ways to share information. One particularly revealing detail emerges from fossil discoveries showing individuals who survive severe injuries. Some ancient skeletons preserve healed fractures that would have left a person unable to hunt or gather independently for months. Others display evidence of tooth loss long before death, implying that companions provide food despite serious disability. These discoveries hint at something profoundly human. Survival depends not only upon physical strength, but upon social bonds strong enough to sustain vulnerable members of the group. Compassion, it seems, possesses deep evolutionary roots. The landscapes surrounding these communities remain anything but stable. Throughout the Pleistocene, Earth's climate swings repeatedly between colder and warmer periods. Massive ice sheets advance across northern continents before retreating again. Sea levels rise and fall by astonishing amounts, exposing land bridges during glacial periods and drowning them when temperatures increase. Coastlines migrate hundreds of kilometers over time. Rivers carve new valleys while others disappear altogether. Entire migration routes open and close with changing climates. During colder intervals, lower sea levels connect regions now separated by oceans. Animals expand into newly accessible territory, followed closely by human hunters. Later warming temperatures flood these connections beneath rising seas, isolating populations once again. Communities that previously exchanged ideas and genes become separated for thousands of years. Such cycles repeat over immense spans of time, continually reshaping humanity's geographic distribution. Scholars still debate exactly how many distinct human species exist during different periods, because evolution rarely produces neat boundaries. Change unfolds gradually. Neighboring populations may continue exchanging genes, while more distant groups become increasingly different. The result resembles overlapping circles rather than sharply divided categories. Fossils often preserve only fragments, making classification difficult. A jawbone discovered in one cave may suggest an entirely new branch of humanity, only for later discoveries to complicate that interpretation. The evidence remains incomplete, yet one conclusion grows steadily stronger. Human diversity reaches extraordinary levels long before recorded history. Europe, Western Asia, Eastern Asia, Ireland, Southeast Asia, and Africa all host populations shaped by unique evolutionary histories. Some remain widespread across enormous territories. Others occupy surprisingly small regions for tens of thousands of years. Geographic isolation sometimes preserves ancient characteristics long after related populations elsewhere have changed dramatically. One lesser-known aspect of this world is how often coastlines dominate human life despite leaving relatively little archaeological evidence. During glacial periods, many settlements stand on coastal plains that today lie beneath hundreds of feet of seawater. Rising seas following the last ice age drown countless campsites, hunting grounds and migration corridors forever. Much of humanity's earliest story may now rest beneath continental shelves where excavation is extraordinarily difficult. This hidden geography reminds researchers that the known record represents only a fraction of prehistoric reality. Every fossil discovered on land survives through remarkable luck. It must escape scavengers, decay, erosion, geological destruction, and countless other hazards before eventually being uncovered by modern scientists. For every spectacular skeleton displayed in a museum, untold numbers disappear forever without leaving recognizable traces. Yet even this incomplete record reveals something remarkable. The world before modern civilization is not empty wilderness awaiting human arrival. It is already inhabited by skilled hunters, careful toolmakers, adaptable explorers, devoted families, and resilient communities spread across an astonishing range of environments. Each population carries generations of accumulated knowledge perfectly suited to its homeland. None can foresee that another branch of the human family is beginning to expand, carrying with it changes that will eventually reshape the destiny of every other surviving lineage. The meeting of these ancient relatives does not begin with conquest or immediate disappearance. It begins simply enough with distant footprints slowly approaching one another across continents that have remained separate for hundreds of thousands of years. For hundreds of thousands of years, the immense distances separating human populations are as powerful as any mountain range or ocean. Deserts expand into nearly impassable barriers. Thick forests hide unfamiliar dangers. Glaciers seal northern routes beneath walls of ice. Even when landscapes briefly become more hospitable, generations may pass before one community ventures far enough to encounter another. Entire branches of humanity grow, adapt, and change without ever knowing that distant relatives are living remarkably similar lives beyond the horizon. Then slowly those horizons begin to shrink. The story starts once again in Africa, where changing climates repeatedly transform the continent. Wet periods cover regions that are now arid with rivers, lakes, and grasslands. During these greener intervals, animals spread into newly productive environments, followed by the human communities that depend upon them. When drought returns, populations retreat toward more reliable sources of water, only to expand again when conditions improve. This constant rhythm of expansion and contraction shapes migration for tens of thousands of years. Modern humans, known scientifically as Homo sapiens, emerge within this dynamic landscape more than 300,000 years ago. Their earliest fossils already reveal people who look surprisingly familiar. Their faces become flatter than many earlier human species. Their skeletons are generally more slender. Their brains fall comfortably within the range seen in living people today. Yet their world remains profoundly different from ours. They share the planet. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that early modern humans are not immediately destined to dominate every landscape they enter. They possess remarkable adaptability, but so do their relatives. Success depends upon local conditions, available resources, and simple chance as much as any inherent biological advantage. The first major journeys beyond Africa likely occur in several waves rather than one dramatic migration. Some early expansions appear to end without leaving lasting descendants. Fossils found in the eastern Mediterranean hint that modern humans occasionally reach Eurasia only to disappear again as climates deteriorate, or competing populations reclaim territory. These forgotten expeditions remind researchers that migration is rarely a one-way march toward permanent settlement. Failure is part of the story. Only much later, roughly 70,000 years ago, do expanding groups of modern humans begin spreading more successfully across southern Asia, eventually reaching Australia, Europe, and many thousands of years later, the Americas. Even this broader expansion is neither rapid nor unstoppable. Small communities move gradually, often covering only a few miles during each generation. Parents settle where resources seem dependable. Their children venture slightly farther. Grandchildren continue the process almost without noticing that they are participating in one of history's greatest migrations. The distances involved remain staggering. From Eastern Africa to Western Europe stretches more than 4,000 miles. Reaching Australia requires crossing stretches of open water that have never entirely disappeared even during periods of lower sea level. These voyages almost certainly involve deliberate planning rather than accidental drifting. Boats made from wood reeds or other organic materials leave virtually no trace after tens of thousands of years, yet the presence of humans on distant islands strongly suggests that some form of watercraft already exists. This quiet technological achievement often receives less attention than it deserves. Crossing open water demands more than courage. It requires cooperation, preparation, navigation, and confidence that another shoreline lies beyond the horizon. Such journeys hint at increasingly sophisticated societies, capable of organizing complex tasks whose rewards may not become apparent for days. As modern humans spread across unfamiliar regions, they enter territories that have been occupied for astonishing lengths of time by other human groups. Europe belongs largely to the Neanderthals. Across vast stretches of Asia, other populations establish their own traditions, though many remain poorly understood because their fossils are scarce. In Siberia, mysterious humans later identified through ancient DNA leave only a handful of bones inside a cave, yet their genetic legacy proves surprisingly widespread. On remote islands farther south, isolated populations continue evolving under conditions unlike anywhere else on Earth. Instead of finding empty continents, modern humans discover neighbours. Exactly what those first encounters look like remains one of prehistory's greatest mysteries. No written records preserve these meetings. No artwork clearly depicts them. Archaeologists must reconstruct events from stone tools, animal bones, campsites, fossil remains, and increasingly fragments of ancient DNA extracted from remarkably well-preserved skeletons. The evidence suggests that encounters vary enormously. Some groups may avoid one another almost entirely separated by different hunting territories or seasonal migration routes. Others almost certainly observe distant campfires, unfamiliar footprints, or strange hunting techniques before ever meeting face to face. Curiosity and caution likely coexist. Each community represents both opportunity and uncertainty. One lesser-known clue comes from the movement of stone. Certain raw materials travel surprising distances through prehistoric landscapes, sometimes far beyond what a single group could easily cover. Scholars still debate whether this reflects direct travel exchange between neighbouring communities or gradual movement through networks extending across many generations. If exchange does occur, it raises fascinating possibilities. Different human populations may occasionally share resources, techniques, or valuable information even without extensive long-term contact. At the same time, competition cannot be ignored. Large mammals provide limited food. Freshwater sources become especially valuable during dry seasons. Sheltered caves suitable for winter survival remain relatively rare in many regions. Whenever two populations depend upon the same resources, tension becomes possible even without organized conflict. Yet no single explanation fully accounts for the archaeological evidence. Some regions show long periods during which multiple human groups occupy neighbouring territories. Others reveal rapid changes that remain difficult to interpret. Climate continues influencing every encounter. During colder periods, shrinking forests push animals into open grasslands. During warmer intervals, expanding vegetation transforms familiar hunting grounds. Rising and falling sea levels repeatedly reshape coastlines, forcing both people and animals to adapt. Environmental pressures sometimes bring different populations into closer contact simply because suitable habitats become smaller. What makes these encounters extraordinary is not merely that different human species meet. It is that they recognize one another as beings close enough to share the same world. The differences between them are real, yet they are not comparable to those separating humans from other animals. They use fire, they manufacture tools, they hunt cooperatively, they care for children, they survive harsh winters and seasonal droughts. Their daily concerns often resemble one another far more than they differ. For countless generations, these parallel histories unfold across Eurasia. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the balance begins to change. Modern human populations continue expanding into new territories with remarkable flexibility. They adapt quickly to unfamiliar environments, develop increasingly varied technologies, and maintain social networks that may stretch across surprisingly large distances. Meanwhile, several older human lineages begin growing smaller, more isolated and increasingly vulnerable to environmental fluctuations. No one living through these centuries could recognize the larger pattern. Each generation experiences only ordinary life, another winter survived, another migration completed, another child born beside a familiar fire. Yet from the perspective of thousands of years, the ancient human family is quietly approaching a turning point from which it will never recover. Among all the vanished branches of humanity, none leaves a stronger impression than the people who come to be known as the Neanderthals. For more than a century after their discovery, they are portrayed as crude, dim-witted cavemen lumbering through frozen landscapes until superior modern humans inevitably replace them. Museums display heavy brows, stooped postures, and exaggerated expressions that reinforce the image of a species somehow trapped between ape and human. Almost every part of that picture eventually proves to be wrong. The real Neanderthals are neither primitive failures nor evolutionary dead ends waiting to disappear. They represent one of the most successful human lineages ever to exist, surviving across Europe and Western Asia for well over 300,000 years. They endure repeated ice ages, shifting forests, expanding grasslands, and dramatic climate swings that reshape entire continents. Few species demonstrate such remarkable resilience. Their bodies tell the story of that endurance. Neanderthals are powerfully built with broad shoulders, muscular limbs, thick bones, and deep chests, capable of supporting immense physical effort. Their shorter arms and legs help conserve heat in cold climates, while their large noses may warm freezing air before it reaches the lungs. Every feature reflects countless generations of adaptation to environments where survival depends upon strength, endurance, and intimate knowledge of harsh landscapes. Far from being clumsy, they are astonishingly capable hunters. Archaeological sites reveal the remains of bison horses, reindeer, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, and occasionally even mammoths. Hunting such dangerous animals requires planning, cooperation, and courage. Spears found at Neanderthal sites are carefully shaped and balanced. Stone tools display consistent craftsmanship refined over thousands of generations. The technology changes slowly, but it is reliable, practical, and perfectly suited to the environments in which they live. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that Neanderthal communities know their territories in extraordinary detail. They understand seasonal migrations, recognize the safest river crossings, remember sheltered valleys protected from winter winds, and exploit local sources of high-quality stone for making tools. This knowledge accumulates gradually through generations, forming a cultural inheritance just as valuable as any physical adaptation. Life, however, remains demanding. Even successful hunts come at considerable risk. Many Neanderthal skeletons preserve healed fractures remarkably similar to injuries seen among modern rodeo riders. Broken ribs, damaged arms, crushed shoulders, and fractured legs appear with surprising frequency. These injuries suggest repeated close encounters with large animals. Hunting often takes place at short range, where a charging bison or wounded horse can inflict devastating wounds in seconds. Yet many individuals survive these injuries for years. Their bones heal. Some continue living despite disabilities that make independent hunting nearly impossible. This simple fact reveals something profound. Companions provide food protection and care over extended periods. Such long-term support reflects communities bound together by cooperation rather than constant competition. Compassion, once imagined as uniquely modern, clearly extends much deeper into humanity's shared past. One particularly remarkable skeleton belongs to an elderly Neanderthal who loses most of his teeth long before death. Without functioning teeth, chewing tough meat becomes extremely difficult. Nevertheless, he survives for years afterward. Someone must soften food, prepare meals differently, or simply ensure that he continues eating despite his limitations. The archaeological record cannot preserve acts of kindness directly, but it quietly records their consequences. The emotional lives of Neanderthals remain impossible to reconstruct completely, yet scattered evidence hints at surprising complexity. Some caves contain individuals deliberately placed in shallow pits. Scholars still debate whether these represent intentional burials or practical disposal of the dead, but several discoveries suggest that bodies are treated with care rather than abandoned. Certain sites preserve pigments that may have been used for decoration. Eagle talons bearing cut marks raise the possibility that feathers or claws occasionally serve symbolic purposes. The evidence remains incomplete, and researchers continue debating its interpretation. Still, the growing picture differs dramatically from older stereotypes. Neanderthals think, plan, remember, cooperate, and adapt with impressive success. Their brains are at least as large as those of modern humans on average, although differences in organization remain difficult to determine. Brain size alone reveals little about intelligence, yet it reinforces an important point. These are not mentally inferior creatures stumbling through prehistory. They are another form of humanity following its own evolutionary path. For hundreds of thousands of years, that path proves remarkably successful. Then modern humans begin appearing more frequently along the edges of Neanderthal territory. At first, these encounters may remain rare. Small groups pass through familiar valleys during seasonal migrations. Distant campfires become visible across open plains. Footprints appear where unfamiliar hunting parties recently crossed muddy ground. Strange stone tools occasionally surface in places where they have never been seen before. No written account records the thoughts of those witnessing such encounters. Did curiosity outweigh caution? Did families quietly observe one another from opposite hillsides before disappearing into separate forests? Did experienced hunters recognize immediately that these newcomers possessed different habits, different tools, and perhaps different ways of organizing their communities? The archaeological evidence cannot answer these questions directly. What it does reveal is prolonged coexistence. For several thousand years in parts of Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals and modern humans occupy neighboring regions. Sometimes their tool traditions remain distinct. Elsewhere, similarities begin emerging that suggest ideas may occasionally spread between populations. Scholars still debate whether these changes result from direct contact-independent invention or shared environmental pressures encouraging similar solutions. Ancient DNA eventually settles one of the greatest mysteries. The two groups do not merely encounter one another, they have children together. This discovery transforms the study of human evolution almost overnight. For generations, scientists argue that different human species are entirely separate. Genetic evidence tells a more complicated story. Most people living outside Africa today inherit roughly 1 to 2% of their DNA from Neanderthal ancestors. Though the percentage appears small, it represents a profound reality. Somewhere in deep prehistory, families form across evolutionary boundaries once believed impossible to cross. The implications extend far beyond simple ancestry. Certain inherited Neanderthal genes influence immune responses, skin biology, fat metabolism, and adaptation to colder climates. Some variants prove beneficial in particular environments, while others are linked to modern medical conditions. Evolution continues working long after Neanderthals themselves disappear, preserving useful traits while gradually reducing others through countless generations. In this sense, they never vanish completely. Pieces of them continue living inside billions of people who may never realize that fragments of an ancient relative still shape their biology today. Yet even this remarkable genetic legacy cannot hide the larger tragedy unfolding across Eurasia. The communities that once dominate Europe through repeated ice ages slowly become fewer. Their territories contract. Their populations fragment into smaller groups separated by increasing distances. Whether the causes lie in climate competition, demographic decline, interbreeding, or some combination of all these forces, the result grows steadily clearer. One of humanity's greatest success stories is quietly approaching its end, even as another branch of the family continues its relentless expansion across the world. While Neanderthals gradually emerge from centuries of archaeological research into familiar figures of prehistory, another branch of humanity remains hidden until remarkably recently. Unlike the Neanderthals, whose skeletons appear across hundreds of sites, these mysterious relatives leave almost nothing behind. There are no complete skulls displayed in museums, no nearly intact skeletons revealing the shape of their bodies, and no broad landscapes filled with recognizable settlements. Their existence comes to light through objects so small that they could easily have been overlooked forever. The discovery begins inside a remote cave in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. Known today as Denisova Cave, the site has sheltered countless generations of humans and animals through changing climates stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Layer upon layer of sediment accumulates over immense spans of time, quietly preserving fragments of forgotten lives. Archaeologists excavating the cave expect important discoveries, but few imagine that one tiny bone will fundamentally alter humanity's family tree. The fragment is astonishingly ordinary. It is little more than the tip of a finger bone belonging to a young girl who lives tens of thousands of years ago. By itself, the fossil reveals almost nothing. Its shape could easily belong to several different human groups. Had researchers relied only upon traditional anatomy, it might have been catalogued without attracting unusual attention. Instead, scientists attempt something revolutionary. They extract ancient DNA. The results are extraordinary. Rather than matching either modern humans or Neanderthals, the genetic material belongs to an entirely different lineage. The evidence is unmistakable. A previously unknown branch of humanity has been hiding in plain sight invisible because so few of its bones survive. Within a matter of years, additional DNA from teeth and other small remains confirms the discovery. These forgotten relatives become known as the Denisovans. Their appearance remains one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution. No complete skeleton has ever been found. Researchers cannot confidently reconstruct their faces, their height, or the exact proportions of their bodies. Artists produce careful illustrations, but these remain informed speculation rather than confirmed portraits. In an age when scientists can recover genetic information from bones no larger than a thumb, they still cannot say with certainty what an entire Denisovan community would have looked like. This strange imbalance between genetic knowledge and physical evidence is almost unique. Humanity discovers one of its closest relatives not through bones but through molecules preserved inside ancient cells. The implications reach far beyond a single cave. Soon after identifying Denisovan DNA, researchers begin comparing it with the genomes of living people. Unexpected patterns emerge almost immediately. Populations in parts of East Asia possess small amounts of Denisovan ancestry. Indigenous peoples of New Guinea and Australia carry substantially higher percentages. Some communities inherit nearly 5% of their DNA from these mysterious ancestors. This can mean only one thing. Modern humans and Denisovans do not merely encounter one another, they form families. Just as with Neanderthals, the evidence reveals interbreeding rather than complete separation. Ancient humanity proves far more interconnected than earlier generations of scientists imagine. The boundaries between different human groups exist, but they are not absolute. Where populations meet, they sometimes exchange far more than tools or territory. One particularly remarkable discovery pushes this realization even further. Inside Denisova Cave, archaeologists uncover the bones of a teenage girl who lived roughly 90,000 years ago. Genetic analysis reveals something astonishing. Her mother is a Neanderthal. Her father is a Denisovan. She is a first-generation hybrid. Until this discovery, researchers debate how often different human groups interbreed. Here, preserved inside a single fragment of bone, lies undeniable evidence that such relationships occur directly. The girl's parents belong to different branches of humanity, yet together they produce a healthy child whose remains survive for tens of thousands of years. This single individual changes the way prehistory is understood. Rather than isolated species living completely separate lives, ancient humans appear increasingly connected through occasional encounters, migrations, and shared ancestry. Evolution resembles less a neatly branching tree than an intricate network whose branches sometimes reconnect after long periods of separation. Scholars still debate how frequently these encounters occur. Some regions may experience only rare contact. Others perhaps become crossroads where multiple human populations overlap for generations. The evidence remains incomplete because ancient DNA survives only under unusually favorable conditions. Warm climates destroy genetic material rapidly, meaning entire chapters of human history may have disappeared forever before scientists have the opportunity to read them. Even so, the Denisovans leave behind another remarkable clue. Certain inherited genes appear to help modern populations adapt to extreme environments. Among people living on the Tibetan Plateau, one Denisovan-derived genetic variant influences how the body responds to low oxygen levels found at high altitude. Without this adaptation, life above 13,000 feet becomes significantly more difficult. The inherited gene helps regulate oxygen use more efficiently, reducing some of the physiological stress caused by thin mountain air. This discovery transforms the meaning of extinction. Although Denisovan communities eventually disappear, part of their biological legacy continues supporting the survival of millions of people today. Evolution preserves what remains useful, even after the population that first develops the adaptation has vanished. It is a quiet kind of immortality. Elsewhere, genetic studies hint at Denisovan diversity far greater than once suspected. The lineage itself may consist of several distinct populations spread across enormous portions of Asia. Some groups inhabit cold northern environments near Siberia. Others appear connected with warmer regions much farther south. Researchers increasingly suspect that the name Denisovan may represent not one small isolated people, but an entire collection of related populations occupying landscapes stretching thousands of miles apart. The fossil evidence, however, remains frustratingly sparse. A finger bone, several teeth, fragments of a jaw discovered on the Tibetan Plateau, a handful of additional remains from scattered sites. Compared with the hundreds of Neanderthal fossils recovered across Europe and Western Asia, the Denisovan record feels almost impossibly incomplete. Yet genetics repeatedly confirms that their influence reaches astonishing distances. This imbalance reminds scientists how fragile the archaeological record truly is. The absence of bones does not necessarily mean the absence of people. Entire populations may flourish for hundreds of thousands of years, while leaving only the faintest physical traces behind. Dense forests, acidic soils, tropical climates, and rising seas destroy evidence with relentless efficiency. Countless settlements disappear beneath vegetation or ocean water. generations live love-raised children and die without leaving skeletons capable of surviving into the modern age. Perhaps the Denisovans are not unusual because they leave so little evidence. Perhaps they are simply the first invisible human lineage that science has learned how to detect. If that possibility is true, then the ancient human family may once have been even larger than current discoveries suggest. Hidden branches may still wait beneath unexplored caves inside forgotten sediments or encoded within fragments of DNA carried silently through living populations. The more scientists search, the clearer one conclusion becomes. Humanity's past is not merely missing a few pages. Entire volumes have yet to be found. If the frozen mountains of Siberia preserve one of humanity's greatest genetic mysteries, the warm islands scattered across Southeast Asia reveal another kind of surprise altogether. Here, evolution follows rules that seem almost impossible at first glance. Large animals shrink. Small animals grow larger. Isolation transforms familiar species into forms found nowhere else on Earth. Even elephants become dwarfs on certain islands, while enormous rats and giant storks occupy ecological roles unlike those seen on nearby continents. It is within this strange evolutionary laboratory that one of the most astonishing members of the human family is discovered. In 2003, archaeologists working inside Liangbua Cave on the Indonesian island of Flores uncover the skeleton of an adult woman unlike any previously known human. At first, researchers struggle to interpret what they are seeing. The bones belong to an individual who stands only about 3.5 feet tall. Her brain is remarkably small, closer in size to much earlier members of the human family than to modern humans or Neanderthals. Yet her stone tools tell a different story. The tools are carefully crafted and entirely capable of butchering animals, processing plants and supporting everyday survival. Nearby archaeological evidence suggests repeated occupation of the cave over thousands of years. Whatever these tiny humans are, they are not simply modern people suffering from a medical condition, as some early critics propose. Further discoveries gradually strengthen the extraordinary conclusion. A distinct human species has survived on Flores until surprisingly recent times. Scientists eventually name it Homo floresiensis, although the public quickly adopts a more memorable nickname. The hobbits. The comparison captures public imagination, but it risks creating the wrong impression. These are not fantasy creatures. They are genuine members of the human family whose existence forces researchers to rethink long-held assumptions about evolution. Their small size is not evidence of primitiveness. Instead, it appears to reflect one of biology's most fascinating processes, island dwarfism. On isolated islands where food is limited and large predators are scarce, natural selection often favors smaller bodies. Large mammals require enormous amounts of energy. Over many generations, individuals needing fewer resources gain an advantage. Gradually, entire populations become smaller. The same evolutionary pressures that shrink elephants may also influence humans. Flores offers exactly the kind of environment where such changes become possible, separated from neighboring islands by deep channels that remain difficult to cross even during periods of lower sea level. Flores functions almost like an isolated world. Animals arriving there evolve independently for immense spans of time. The ancestors of Homo floresiensis likely reach the island hundreds of thousands of years earlier, though scholars still debate precisely which human lineage gives rise to them. That question remains one of the most intriguing puzzles in paleoanthropology. Some researchers argue that the hobbits descend from Homo erectus, an earlier human species already known for remarkable long-distance migrations. Others suggest an even more ancient ancestor may be responsible. The evidence remains incomplete because fossils are limited, and each new discovery has the potential to alter current interpretations. Whatever their origins, the people of Flores adapt remarkably well. Stone tools found at archaeological sites indicate hunting, food preparation, and long-term occupation. They share their island with giant storks, enormous Komodo dragons, dwarf elephants called stegodon, and other unusual animals shaped by the same forces of isolation. Their daily lives likely revolve around seasonal changes, local vegetation, freshwater sources, and careful knowledge of an environment unlike any found elsewhere in the prehistoric world. Life on an island demands flexibility. Resources fluctuate. Storms isolate communities for weeks or months. Small populations become especially vulnerable to drought, volcanic eruptions, disease, or simple accidents of chance. Unlike continental populations that may exchange members across enormous territories, island communities possess few opportunities for reinforcement when numbers decline. This vulnerability becomes increasingly important as modern humans spread through Southeast Asia. Evidence suggests that Homo sapiens eventually reach Flores while the hobbits are still present, although the exact timing remains debated. Archaeological layers indicate that Homo floresiensis disappears roughly 50,000 years ago, around the same broad period when modern humans become established across the region. Whether these events are directly connected remains uncertain. Scholars continue examining several possible explanations. Climate shifts alter local ecosystems. Volcanic activity repeatedly reshapes the island. Changing vegetation affects prey species. Small populations experience reduced genetic diversity. Competition with newly arriving modern humans may place additional pressure on already fragile communities. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance. Instead, multiple forces likely interact over generations. This pattern has become increasingly familiar throughout the study of vanished human relatives. Rarely does extinction result from one dramatic catastrophe. More often it resembles a slow narrowing of possibilities. Food becomes less predictable. Communities grow smaller. Young people have fewer opportunities to find unrelated partners. Environmental disruptions arrive more frequently. Each challenge alone might be survivable. Together they become overwhelming. Flores is not the only island preserving evidence of unexpected human diversity. Farther north on the Philippine island of Luzon, another remarkable discovery emerges. In 2019, scientists announced the identification of Homo luzonensis, known from a collection of teeth, finger bones, foot bones, and leg bones recovered from Callao Cave. Like the hobbits, these humans display a surprising mixture of ancient and more modern anatomical features. Some characteristics resemble much earlier members of the human family. Others appear unexpectedly advanced. The combination resists easy classification. Again, the fossil record offers only fragments. Again, it reveals that isolated islands nurture evolutionary experiments unlike those taking place on larger continents. The existence of both Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis carries profound implications. It suggests that ancient Southeast Asia supports a remarkable diversity of human populations, many of which remain almost completely unknown. Rising sea levels after the last ice age submerge enormous coastal plains that once connected islands more closely than today. Countless archaeological sites now lie beneath tropical seas where excavation is extraordinarily difficult. What survives on land may represent only a tiny fraction of what once existed. There is another lesson hidden within these discoveries. For much of scientific history, researchers unconsciously expect human evolution to follow a single direction, toward larger brains, taller bodies, and increasingly uniform anatomy. Island populations challenge that expectation. Evolution has no predetermined destination. It simply favors characteristics that improve survival under local conditions. On Flores, smaller bodies prove successful for tens of thousands of years. On Luzon, different combinations of traits emerge under different environmental pressures. Elsewhere, entirely different adaptations appear. The human family becomes not a procession toward one ideal form, but a collection of experiments responding to countless landscapes across the planet. Some endure. Some disappear, some leave descendants, others vanish so completely that only a few scattered bones remain to remind the modern world that humanity was once far more diverse than anyone could have imagined. Across the immense span of the Ice Age climate is never merely a backdrop to human history. It is an active force constantly rearranging the stage on which every human population struggles to survive. Mountains become glaciers, grasslands transform into forests before returning once more to open plains. Rivers change course, lakes appear, expand and vanish. Coastlines move so dramatically that places separated today by miles of ocean are once connected by broad valleys where people hunt, gather and raise families. For the lost branches of humanity, these environmental changes are neither rare nor temporary. They define everyday existence. The last 2 million years are marked by repeated glacial cycles. During colder periods, enormous ice sheets spread across northern Europe and North America, locking away vast quantities of water. Sea levels fall by more than 300 feet. New land bridges emerge between continents. Broad coastal plains become available for migration, while other regions become nearly impossible to inhabit beneath advancing ice. When temperatures rise again, everything changes. The glaciers retreat. Forests spread northward, rainfall patterns shift, the oceans reclaim the exposed coastlines, swallowing campsites that may have been occupied for thousands of years. Every generation inherits a landscape slightly different from the one known by its grandparents. For prehistoric humans, survival depends upon reading these changes with extraordinary precision. A valley that supports abundant game for centuries may gradually become too dry to sustain large herds. Rivers that once flowed year-round shrink into seasonal streams. Familiar migration routes disappear beneath dense woodland. The arrival of warmer weather does not necessarily make life easier. Every environmental shift creates both opportunities and dangers, rewarding flexibility, while punishing rigid dependence on any single way of life. Modern humans often prove remarkably adaptable under these conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests that Homo sapiens develop increasingly diverse toolkits as they spread into unfamiliar environments. Instead of relying upon one successful strategy, everywhere different communities adjust their technologies according to local conditions. Along coastlines, fishing and shellfish collection become increasingly important. In forests, hunting methods differ from those used across open grasslands. Cold northern environments require carefully tailored clothing, insulated shelters, and methods of storing food through long winters. Adaptation becomes cultural as much as biological. Knowledge passes rapidly through social networks. New techniques spread between neighboring groups. Useful innovations survive because they can be taught rather than waiting for evolutionary change across thousands of generations. This flexibility may become one of modern humanity's greatest strengths. Other human relatives are equally impressive in their own environments. Neanderthals endure repeated glacial periods with remarkable success. Their powerful physiques suit cold climates exceptionally well. They understand seasonal animal migrations, exploit familiar territories with great efficiency, and survive in Europe through environmental fluctuations that would challenge any population. Yet the climate of the late Pleistocene begins changing with unusual speed. Around 70,000 years ago and continuing for tens of thousands of years afterward, rapid climatic oscillations repeatedly alter ecosystems across Eurasia. Some of these shifts occur within only a few human generations. Temperatures rise abruptly before falling again. Forests expand into open hunting grounds only to retreat once more as colder conditions return. Such instability creates constant uncertainty. Food resources become less predictable. Animal populations shift their ranges. Communities that have perfected survival in one environment suddenly face unfamiliar conditions. Scholars still debate exactly how severely these fluctuations affect different human species, But few doubt that environmental instability places increasing pressure on already scattered populations. Small groups are particularly vulnerable. When numbers remain low, even ordinary setbacks become dangerous. A harsh winter, poor hunting season, epidemic disease, or failed generation of births may reduce populations below the level needed for long-term recovery. Unlike modern societies connected by global transportation and communication, prehistoric communities often live in relative isolation. Neighbouring groups may be weeks away on foot, separated by mountains, rivers, or hostile territory. If one small community disappears, there may be no replacement. The loss becomes permanent. One lesser-known aspect of Ice Age survival involves the invisible geography created by changing sea levels. Today, the waters between Asia and many Indonesian islands appear formidable. During glacial periods, however, lowered seas expose vast plains known collectively as Sunderland. Rivers cross these newly revealed landscapes, connecting regions that later disappear beneath rising oceans. Animals migrate across these corridors, followed by human hunters. Farther north, another remarkable land bridge forms between Siberia and Alaska. Known today as Beringia, it stretches hundreds of miles across what is now the Bering Sea. This immense grassland supports mammoths, bison, horses, and countless other animals. Human communities eventually cross this landscape, beginning the long settlement of the Americas. Yet these temporary connections never last. As glaciers melt, seawater floods low-lying terrain. Entire valleys vanish beneath the ocean. Settlements occupied for generations disappear forever. The archaeological consequences are enormous. Many of the most attractive places for prehistoric people to live are coastal. Rivers meet the sea. Fish, shellfish, birds, mammals, and edible plants become concentrated in relatively small areas. Such environments provide dependable food throughout much of the year. Unfortunately for archaeologists, those same coastal settlements are now underwater. This means that an unknown portion of humanity's prehistoric record has simply disappeared beneath the waves. Researchers recover occasional evidence through underwater archaeology, but the scale of the challenge is immense. Thousands of square miles of former landscape remain unexplored. Hidden beneath layers of sediment may lie campsites, tools, footprints, and even human remains belonging to populations never documented elsewhere. The evidence remains incomplete, reminding scientists that every reconstruction of prehistory is necessarily provisional. Beyond environmental changes themselves lies another important factor. Climate influences not only where people can live, but also how frequently different populations encounter one another. As favourable habitats shrink, communities become concentrated into smaller regions. Valleys supporting fresh water become increasingly valuable. Sheltered caves attract repeated occupation. Migration routes overlap more often. Contact between different human groups may therefore become more common precisely when environmental stress is greatest. Sometimes such encounters may encourage exchange. At other times they may increase competition. Exactly how these interactions unfold remains impossible to determine in most cases. What survives in the archaeological record suggests remarkable complexity rather than one universal pattern. Some regions preserve evidence of coexistence lasting thousands of years. Others reveal abrupt disappearances that remain difficult to explain. The growing picture is one of extraordinary resilience tested repeatedly by an unpredictable planet. Every human species alive during the Ice Age possesses impressive adaptations. Everyone survives environmental challenges that would overwhelm most modern societies stripped of technology. Yet resilience has limits. As climates continue fluctuating, populations fragment into smaller pockets, scattered across increasingly isolated landscapes. Some recover, others never do. Without realizing it, many of these ancient communities are approaching the point where survival depends not only on enduring nature's hardships, but also on navigating a world in which more human populations than ever before are beginning to cross paths. The greatest challenge facing the lost branches of humanity may no longer come from the cold alone. It may come from living in a world that is becoming steadily more crowded. At first, disappearance does not resemble a dramatic ending. There is no single battle, no overwhelming catastrophe, and no moment when one human species simply replaces another across an entire continent. The archaeological record refuses to support such a simple story. Instead, extinction unfolds with almost unsettling quietness. A familiar campsite is never occupied again. A hunting territory slowly shrinks. One valley loses its last inhabitants, while another continues supporting life for centuries more. Across thousands of years, the human family begins to grow smaller, one isolated community at a time. This gradual process makes the mystery extraordinarily difficult to reconstruct. Imagine looking at a world map where thousands of lights represent living human communities. At first, the lights glow across Africa, Europe, Asia, and scattered islands farther east. Then, over countless generations, individual lights begin to fade. Most disappear unnoticed because others remain nearby. Eventually, the gaps between surviving populations become larger. Communication grows more difficult. Opportunities to exchange knowledge decline. Entire regions fall silent. No one living through these changes would recognize them as the beginning of extinction. Life continues as it always has. Children are born. Hunters leave camp before sunrise. Stone tools are repaired beside evening fires. The seasons return. Yet beneath this ordinary rhythm, population numbers are quietly changing. One of the greatest challenges facing prehistoric communities is simple mathematics. Unlike modern civilizations numbering in the millions, ancient human populations remain astonishingly small. Even successful species may consist of only tens of thousands of individuals spread across enormous territories. Local communities often include no more than a few dozen people living together, occasionally meeting neighboring groups during seasonal migrations or special gatherings. Such small numbers create hidden dangers. A single severe winter can eliminate an entire community. Repeated poor hunting seasons reduce birth rates. Disease spreads rapidly through closely connected families. If neighboring groups disappear, surviving communities become increasingly isolated. Genetic diversity slowly declines. The consequences may not become obvious for many generations, but they accumulate steadily. Researchers studying population genetics have discovered that bottlenecks periods during which population numbers fall dramatically leave measurable signatures within DNA. These genetic patterns suggest that several ancient human groups experienced prolonged reductions in population size long before their final disappearance. Small populations are not automatically doomed. Many species recover successfully after temporary declines. The problem arises when environmental instability, geographic isolation, and demographic decline begin reinforcing one another. Each challenge amplifies the next. Imagine a Neanderthal community living within a familiar river valley. For generations, the surrounding forests provide reliable hunting. Nearby caves offer winter shelter. Stone suitable for making tools is plentiful. Then climate begins shifting. Animal migrations become less predictable. Another harsh winter reduces already scarce food supplies. A neighboring community that once exchanged marriage partners disappears. The surviving group becomes more isolated. Young adults must travel farther to find unrelated partners, increasing both risk and uncertainty. Every decision carries greater consequences than before. This process unfolds not over months but over centuries. It is almost invisible within a single lifetime. Across Europe, archaeological evidence increasingly suggests that Neanderthal populations become fragmented during their final millennia. Instead of occupying broad continuous territories, they appear concentrated in scattered refuges separated by large distances. Some valleys remain inhabited while others are abandoned. Southern Europe, with its comparatively milder climates, may provide important sanctuaries during colder phases. Scholars still debate exactly how fragmented these populations become. The fossil record is incomplete. Many sites remain undiscovered, yet the overall trend points toward increasing isolation rather than expansion. Meanwhile, modern human populations continue growing. This growth should not be imagined as an overwhelming tidal wave sweeping across continents. Expansion remains slow by modern standards. Families move gradually into new territories over hundreds of generations. Communities establish seasonal camps before settling more permanently. Knowledge spreads through social networks linking distant groups. The cumulative effect, however, becomes significant. Even modest population growth allows modern humans to occupy increasingly diverse environments. Some researchers argue that larger interconnected networks provide an important advantage. If one community experiences crop failure today, neighboring societies may offer assistance. Ice Age hunter-gatherers possess no agriculture, yet similar principles apply. Communities connected through broader exchange networks can share raw materials, hunting knowledge, marriage partners, and technological innovations. When disaster strikes one region, information continues flowing from others. Isolated populations lack this resilience. One particularly intriguing clue comes from stone tools. Late Neanderthal sites often preserve traditions that remain remarkably consistent across long periods. Modern human toolkits, by contrast, become increasingly diverse. Bone needles appear, allowing better-fitted clothing. Projectile technologies improve. Decorative objects become more common in some regions. None of these innovations alone determine survival. Taken together, however, they suggest growing cultural flexibility. Ideas themselves become powerful survival tools. A successful hunting technique invented hundreds of miles away can eventually reach distant communities without requiring biological evolution. Culture begins adapting faster than anatomy. Another subtle difference may involve social scale. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that modern humans sometimes maintain broader networks, extending beyond immediate family groups. Marine shells transported far inland exotic stone materials and stylistic similarities across wide regions hint at connections linking communities separated by considerable distances. Exactly how these networks function remains uncertain. Perhaps people meet seasonally. Perhaps exchange occurs gradually through neighboring groups. Perhaps marriages strengthen alliances between distant populations. The evidence cannot answer every question. Still, broader connections may reduce vulnerability during difficult times. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of older human lineages. Climate clearly matters. Population size matters. Isolation matters. Technological flexibility matters. Interbreeding also matters because some disappearing groups contribute genetically to expanding modern populations rather than vanishing completely. Each factor intertwines with the others. This complexity frustrates anyone seeking a simple cause. Yet it also reflects how extinction usually works in nature. Rarely does one overwhelming force act alone. Instead, multiple pressures accumulate until recovery becomes increasingly unlikely. One lesser-known insight comes from computer simulations conducted by population scientists. These models demonstrate that surprisingly small differences in birth rate, survival, or social connectivity can produce dramatic outcomes over thousands of years. A population that grows only slightly faster than another does not appear dramatically different after 1 century. After several thousand years, however, the numerical gap becomes enormous. Chance itself plays a greater role than many people realize. A few fortunate generations can preserve an entire lineage. A series of unfortunate ones may erase it forever. By approximately 40,000 years ago, much of Europe has changed. Modern humans occupy landscapes once dominated by Neanderthals. Some Neanderthal communities survive longer in isolated southern regions, but their numbers continue declining. Elsewhere across Asia, other ancient human populations are also becoming increasingly difficult to trace. The world is not yet home to one humanity, but it is steadily moving in that direction. The process is so gradual that no living witness could fully comprehend it. Only tens of thousands of years later, when scattered bones, fragments of DNA, and buried campsites are finally assembled into a larger story, does the true scale of that quiet disappearance begin to emerge. The disappearance of humanity's lost relatives has inspired countless explanations, ranging from careful scientific models to dramatic stories of conquest and catastrophe. For much of the 20th century, one idea dominates popular imagination. Modern humans arrive in unfamiliar lands, overwhelm every competing human species, and quickly replace them through superior intelligence, better weapons, or outright violence. It is a simple narrative, easy to understand and dramatic enough to endure. The evidence, however, tells a far more complicated story. Archaeologists, geneticists, climatologists, and anthropologists now approach the question from many different directions, and while each discipline contributes important pieces, none produces a complete answer on its own. The more evidence accumulates, the clearer it becomes that no single explanation fully accounts for why one branch of humanity survives while so many others quietly disappear. One of the oldest hypotheses focuses on direct competition. Modern humans and other human species often depend upon similar resources. They hunt many of the same animals, gather comparable plants, and seek shelter in the same favorable landscapes. During periods of environmental stress, competition for these limited resources may intensify. At first glance, the idea appears reasonable. If two populations occupy overlapping territories while relying upon the same food sources, eventually one might gain an advantage. Yet archaeology offers surprisingly little evidence for widespread organized warfare between different human species. Weapons clearly exist. Traumatic injuries appear in some skeletons. Individual acts of violence undoubtedly occur. But there are no unmistakable signs of continent-wide campaigns or systematic extermination. Such scenarios remain speculative rather than supported by convincing archaeological evidence. Violence may have happened. It almost certainly happened, at least occasionally. Whether it explains extinction is another matter entirely. Another possibility involves disease. Throughout history, isolated human populations have often suffered devastating epidemics after encountering unfamiliar pathogens carried by outsiders. The arrival of Europeans in the Americas provides a tragic historical example where diseases spread far beyond the areas first visited by explorers. Could something similar occur during prehistory? The idea has attracted considerable interest because ancient human groups remain separated for immense periods, allowing different pathogens to evolve independently. When populations finally meet, they may exchange diseases to which neither possesses complete immunity. Unfortunately, proving this hypothesis is extremely difficult. Ancient pathogens rarely survive in the archaeological record. Skeletal remains preserve only certain diseases affecting bone. Many infections leave no visible trace. The absence of evidence therefore cannot confirm or reject prehistoric epidemics. Disease almost certainly influences ancient populations. Whether it becomes a decisive factor remains uncertain. Climate continues to provide another powerful explanation. As Ice Age conditions fluctuate, habitats shift repeatedly across Europe and Asia. Forests replace open grasslands before retreating again. Large grazing animals alter their migration routes. Communities that have depended upon familiar hunting grounds for thousands of years suddenly confront unfamiliar ecosystems. Modern humans appear exceptionally flexible under these changing conditions. Their broader diets, wider social networks, and increasingly varied technologies may allow them to adapt more rapidly than smaller, more isolated populations. This does not necessarily mean they are stronger or more intelligent. It may simply mean they possess greater flexibility. Sometimes survival depends less upon perfection than upon versatility. Population size also emerges as a surprisingly influential factor. Imagine two neighboring human groups. One numbers 50,000 individuals spread across a continent. The other numbers, perhaps 5,000, divided into scattered communities, both experience identical environmental challenges. Even if each individual possesses similar survival skills, the larger population enjoys important statistical advantages. More children are born, more innovations arise, more opportunities exist for exchanging knowledge. Random disasters affect a smaller proportion of the total population. Small populations, by contrast, remain vulnerable to simple chance. A sequence of harsh winters, poor hunting seasons, several years of low birth rates, the loss of a few neighbouring communities, each setback becomes proportionally more severe. Population models repeatedly demonstrate that demographic decline can continue quietly for thousands of years before finally becoming irreversible. This slow unravelling leaves remarkably little archaeological drama. Communities simply become fewer. There is also the possibility that extinction is not always complete. Ancient DNA has already demonstrated that modern humans interbreed with both Neanderthals and Denisovans. Instead of disappearing entirely, portions of these populations may gradually become absorbed into expanding modern communities. In such cases, extinction becomes something more subtle. The distinct population vanishes, its descendants do not. Their genes continue flowing through future generations, increasingly diluted but never entirely erased. This process resembles rivers joining a larger stream. The individual river loses its separate identity. The water itself continues flowing. One particularly fascinating consequence of genetic research is the realization that some inherited traits remain useful long after their original populations disappear. Genes associated with immune function help modern humans respond to unfamiliar pathogens. Others influence skin characteristics, metabolism, or adaptation to cold environments. Natural selection preserves certain inherited variants because they improve survival under local conditions. In effect, evolution remembers what history forgets. Scholars still debate another important possibility. Perhaps cultural differences play a greater role than biological differences. Modern human societies increasingly display evidence of long-distance exchange, symbolic expression, artistic traditions, and complex social networks. Cave paintings, carved figurines, beads, engraved objects, musical instruments, and elaborate ornaments begin appearing more frequently after roughly 50,000 years ago. These discoveries raise intriguing questions. Do such cultural developments strengthen cooperation between distant communities? Do symbols reinforce group identity? Do larger networks encourage faster transmission of useful ideas? The archaeological record cannot fully answer these questions, but culture itself may become an adaptive advantage. Knowledge spreads more rapidly than genes. An improved hunting technique invented by one group can reach another within a few generations. Biological evolution requires thousands. Some researchers caution against overstating these differences. Neanderthals also produce symbolic objects. They use pigments. They carefully manufacture tools. Their abilities continue being reassessed with each new discovery. The dividing line between populations grows less distinct rather than more obvious. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson emerging from decades of research. The ancient human family does not consist of advanced winners and primitive losers. Instead, it includes several remarkably successful populations responding differently to changing worlds. Each possesses strengths. Each faces limitations. Each survives for astonishing lengths of time. The fact that only one lineage remains today says surprisingly little about inherent superiority. History often favors those who happen to occupy favorable circumstances when environments begin changing. Chance geography, climate, population dynamics, and social organization all interact in ways impossible to predict from the perspective of any single generation. One lesser-known insight comes from ecological studies of modern endangered species. Populations rarely disappear because of one isolated cause. Habitat loss combines with disease. Disease combines with reduced genetic diversity. Reduced diversity combines with environmental stress. The final collapse appears sudden. but the underlying process has often been unfolding quietly for centuries. Human relatives may experience remarkably similar patterns. By the time archaeologists notice shrinking populations in the fossil record, the decisive changes may already have been underway for thousands of years. The search for one perfect explanation therefore gives way to something both more complex and more convincing. The lost branches of humanity do not vanish because of a single event. They disappear through an intricate web of interacting pressures, each reinforcing the next until recovery becomes impossible. The tragedy lies not in one catastrophic moment. It lies in the slow realization that an entire family of humans gradually fades from the earth, leaving only scattered bones, fragments of DNA, and questions that science is still patiently trying to answer. For generations, the search for humanity's lost relatives depends almost entirely upon bones. Archaeologists comb riverbanks, caves, and ancient sediments, hoping to uncover skulls, teeth, or fragments of limbs preserved against extraordinary odds. Every discovery is precious because fossils are so rare. Entire decades sometimes pass without a single find capable of changing the broader picture. Then, almost unexpectedly, science begins uncovering ancient humans without finding their skeletons at all. The revolution begins with DNA. Inside every living cell lies a record written across countless generations. Most of it describes immediate ancestry, but hidden within the genome are older stories stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. For much of scientific history, these stories remain unreadable. Ancient DNA degrades rapidly after death, breaking into tiny fragments, damaged by moisture, heat, bacteria, and time. Researchers once assumed that recovering meaningful genetic material from prehistoric humans will be nearly impossible. They are wrong. Advances in molecular biology transform the field with astonishing speed. New methods allow scientists to identify and assemble microscopic fragments of DNA preserved inside dense bones and teeth. Under exceptionally favorable conditions, especially in cold caves, enough genetic information survives to reconstruct relationships between populations that vanished tens of thousands of years earlier. Almost immediately, long-standing assumptions begin to collapse. Ancient DNA confirms that Neanderthals and modern humans interbreed. It identifies the Denisovans as an entirely separate lineage. It reveals migrations previously invisible in the archaeological record. Every improvement in technology uncovers new layers of complexity hidden inside the genomes of both ancient and living people. Yet perhaps the most surprising discoveries emerge from places where no recognizable human bones exist. Researchers begin extracting DNA directly from cave sediments. At first, the idea sounds improbable. Thousands of years after a campsite has been abandoned, surely no biological traces remain. But every human leaves behind microscopic fragments. Hair falls naturally. Tiny flakes of skin mix with dust. Blood enters the soil through minor injuries. Waste products become buried beneath later layers of sediment. Over immense spans of time, these traces become almost unimaginably small, yet under favorable conditions, fragments of genetic material remain trapped within the earth itself. Suddenly, an entire cave can become a genetic archive. Even when skeletons have long since disappeared, sediments preserve evidence that particular human populations once occupied the site. This breakthrough dramatically expands the number of places capable of revealing ancient history. Instead of relying solely upon rare fossil discoveries, scientists begin reading invisible biological signatures preserved inside the landscape. The implications are profound. A cave may contain traces of Neanderthals during one period, Denisovans during another, and modern humans later still, even if no complete skeleton from any of those occupations survives. Occupation itself leaves a detectable fingerprint. This technology also highlights an uncomfortable reality. The fossil record is deeply incomplete. For every ancient human skeleton discovered, countless others almost certainly vanish without trace. Acidic soils dissolve bone. Tropical heat accelerates decay. Rivers scatter remains across great distances. Predators disturb burial sites. Geological processes crush, erode, or bury evidence beyond recovery. Absence of fossils is therefore not evidence of absence. This realization encourages scientists to reconsider regions previously dismissed as unimportant. Tropical Southeast Asia, Central Africa, and large portions of Southern Asia preserve relatively few ancient human fossils compared with Europe. For many years, this imbalance leads researchers to assume that fewer human populations inhabit these regions. Increasingly, that assumption appears mistaken. Warm climates destroy evidence more efficiently. The people themselves may have been every bit as diverse. Genetic studies of living populations provide another unexpected window into these vanished worlds. When researchers compare DNA from people across different continents, certain segments resist explanation through known human lineages alone. They resemble neither purely modern human DNA nor clearly Neanderthal or Denisovan sequences. Instead, they hint at additional populations that have never been identified through fossils. These mysterious ancestors are sometimes described as ghost populations. The name is appropriate. They leave no recognizable skeletons. No confirmed archaeological culture bears their identity. They survive only as faint genetic echoes inherited by later generations. One intriguing example emerges from studies of several African populations. Unlike Eurasia, Africa preserves relatively little ancient DNA because warm conditions rapidly destroy genetic material. Nevertheless, comparisons among living genomes suggest that modern Africans may inherit small portions of DNA from ancient human populations that diverge from our lineage hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Exactly who these people are remains uncertain. Perhaps they represent isolated branches of Homo sapiens. Perhaps they belong to another closely related human lineage still unknown to science. The evidence remains incomplete. What survives in the genetic record suggests only that humanity's family tree within Africa may have been considerably more complicated than researchers once believed. Elsewhere, similar hints continue emerging. Every improvement in analytical techniques reveals subtler patterns hidden inside modern genomes. The more scientists examine these patterns, the more difficult it becomes to believe that every important human population has already been discovered. Instead, the opposite conclusion grows stronger. Several branches of humanity may have vanished so completely that only their inherited DNA remains. This possibility changes how extinction itself is understood. A population may disappear physically while continuing genetically. Another may leave neither fossils nor living descendants, erasing almost every trace of its existence. Still another may survive only through isolated skeletal fragments waiting beneath unexplored caves or submerged coastlines. The ancient world becomes populated by invisible neighbours whose presence can be inferred but not yet fully described. One lesser-known innovation is the recovery of ancient proteins from exceptionally old fossils. DNA rarely survives beyond several 100,000 years under most conditions. Proteins, however, sometimes endure longer. By analysing preserved proteins from fossilised teeth and bones, researchers can estimate evolutionary relationships even when usable. DNA has disappeared completely. This growing field, known as paleoproteomics, promises to extend humanity's readable history even farther into the past. Each technological advance expands the horizon. Questions once considered impossible now become active areas of research. Who are the ghost populations hinted at by genetic evidence? How many separate human lineages inhabit Africa during the Middle Stone Age? Did additional island populations evolve in isolation before disappearing beneath rising seas? How many ancient coastlines remain unexplored beneath modern oceans? The list continues growing rather than shrinking. Perhaps the greatest lesson is one of humility. For more than a century, scientists believe they possess a reasonably complete picture of human evolution. Within only a few decades, new methods reveal entire branches of humanity that nobody even suspects. The transformation serves as a reminder that scientific understanding is never fixed. Every generation inherits better tools than the last. With those tools come discoveries that would once have seemed almost impossible. The lost humans who vanish from our bloodline are no longer silent simply because their bones are missing. The earth itself has begun speaking in another language, one written not in stone but in molecules patiently preserved beneath our feet for tens of thousands of years. As the ancient human family becomes increasingly fragmented, geography begins determining survival as much as biology. Across Eurasia, populations that once occupied broad territories retreat into smaller and smaller refuges. These final strongholds are rarely the richest landscapes or the easiest places to live. Instead, they are often regions where changing climates, mountains, coastlines, or forests create temporary shelters from the forces reshaping the rest of the world. The last chapters of lost human lineages are written not across continents but within isolated pockets of land. One of the clearest examples comes from the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years they dominate much of Europe and Western Asia, adapting repeatedly to advancing glaciers and retreating forests. Yet as their numbers decline, archaeological evidence suggests that their distribution becomes increasingly uneven. Vast areas that once support numerous communities gradually fall silent, while a handful of southern regions continue showing signs of occupation. The Iberian Peninsula, parts of southern France, Italy, and portions of the Balkans may serve as important refuges during some of the harshest climatic periods. These landscapes offer several advantages. Mountain ranges create sheltered valleys protected from severe weather. Rivers continue flowing even during colder intervals. Plant diversity remains relatively high compared with the frozen plains farther north. Animals displaced by changing climates often concentrate within these more hospitable environments. For small human communities struggling to survive, such places become precious. Yet refuge carries its own dangers. As suitable habitats shrink, surviving populations become compressed into increasingly limited territory. Neighbouring groups that once remained separated by great distances now occupy adjacent valleys or nearby cave systems. Resources support only so many people. Social networks become more fragile. If one community disappears, the chain connecting several others may be broken forever. Isolation quietly deepens. One remarkable archaeological pattern illustrates this process. Some caves show repeated occupation over tens of thousands of years before suddenly falling silent. Layers of ash, animal bones, stone tools, and hearths accumulate one above another, preserving generations of everyday life. Then, without obvious catastrophe, human traces simply end. No burned settlements, no mass graves, no evidence of sudden destruction. The people are simply gone. Elsewhere, modern human artifacts begin appearing only centuries or millennia later. These silent transitions remain among the most haunting aspects of prehistoric archaeology. Unlike later civilizations, vanished hunter-gatherer communities rarely leave monuments announcing their existence. When they disappear, forests reclaim their camps. Wind scatters the ashes of ancient fires. Animals carry away abandoned bones. Within surprisingly little time, the landscape itself conceals nearly every sign that people ever lived there. The Denisovans present an even greater mystery. Because so few of their fossils survive, identifying their final refuges becomes extraordinarily difficult. Denisova Cave in Siberia clearly preserves one important location, but genetic evidence suggests that Denisovan populations occupy regions stretching thousands of miles farther south. Some inherited DNA found among present-day populations in New Guinea and surrounding islands indicates that certain Denisovan groups adapt to tropical environments very different from the cold mountains of Siberia. This raises fascinating possibilities. Rather than existing as one small isolated population, Denisovans may occupy a chain of scattered refugees extending across much of Asia. Many of these places now lie hidden beneath dense forests, deep cave systems, or coastlines submerged after the last ice age. The archaeological silence may reflect preservation rather than absence. Small islands introduce another pattern. Communities living on Flores or Luzon survive within natural laboratories of isolation. Their worlds are defined by shorelines that few outsiders cross. Such isolation protects unique evolutionary pathways for immense spans of time, allowing distinct human forms to persist long after similar populations elsewhere disappear. Yet the same isolation also limits recovery. A disease outbreak, a volcanic eruption, a prolonged drought, any one of these events may reduce numbers beyond the point of return. Without neighbouring populations to replenish lost families, extinction becomes increasingly difficult to avoid. Volcanoes deserve particular attention. The landscapes inhabited by many prehistoric humans are geologically active. Indonesia alone contains dozens of volcanoes capable of transforming entire ecosystems. Ash blankets, forests, rivers change course, and food supplies collapse following major eruptions. Most volcanic events remain regional rather than global, but for small island communities they can prove devastating. Scholars still debate how frequently volcanic disasters contribute to the disappearance of isolated human populations. The evidence remains incomplete because eruptions, erosion, and tropical vegetation often destroy the very archaeological layers researchers hope to study. Even without catastrophe, however, isolation slowly alters population dynamics. Modern genetic studies demonstrate that small communities experience increasing levels of relatedness over time if new individuals rarely arrive. Reduced genetic diversity can make populations more vulnerable to disease and environmental change. This does not mean extinction becomes inevitable. Many isolated populations survive successfully for long periods. But when combined with climatic instability and shrinking habitat, genetic isolation may become one more thread in a growing web of vulnerability. One particularly moving aspect of these final refuges is how ordinary life likely appears to those living within them. Parents teach children familiar hunting routes. Experienced gatherers recognize edible plants emerging with each season. Stone tools are repaired using techniques perfected across countless generations. Stories are shared beside evening fires. No one realizes they belong to one of the final surviving communities of an ancient human lineage. History rarely announces its endings. The last Neanderthal child born in Europe almost certainly grows up without knowing that no future generation of her people will follow. The last Denisovan family living in some remote Asian valley cannot imagine that their existence will one day be known only through fragments of DNA. The final hobbits of Flores continue gathering food beneath tropical trees without recognizing that their unique branch of humanity is approaching its end. Extinction is experienced only in retrospect. At the time, life simply continues. This realization gives prehistoric disappearance an unexpected emotional weight. It reminds us that every vanished lineage consists not of abstract evolutionary categories but of real communities. People laugh. People mourn. People care for injured companions. People celebrate births and endure losses. The archaeological record preserves almost none of these intimate moments, yet they undoubtedly fill everyday life just as they do today. By the time modern humans become the only surviving branch of the human family, the process has unfolded so gradually that the planet itself scarcely seems different. The rivers continue flowing. The seasons continue changing. Animals follow familiar migration routes. Only one subtle difference remains. The campfires burning across the landscape now belong to a single surviving kind of human. The remarkable diversity that once characterized our family has quietly faded into memory, leaving behind only scattered clues waiting patiently beneath stone soil and ice. For thousands of years after the last of our close human relatives disappear, the Earth gives little indication that anything extraordinary has happened. Forests continue spreading across abandoned valleys. Rivers carry away the ashes of forgotten campfires. Wind fills ancient footprints with dust. The silence grows so complete that by the time the first civilizations begin recording history, the existence of other human species has already passed beyond living memory. Humanity forgets that it was ever a family. This forgetting lasts remarkably long. Ancient civilizations develop rich traditions explaining where people come from. Myths describe divine creation, heroic ancestors, or the emergence of humanity from sacred landscapes. Philosophers speculate about the nature of human origins. Historians attempt to preserve the memory of kingdoms and empires, yet none of them suspect that only a few tens of thousands of years earlier, other kinds of humans still walk the earth. The evidence simply lies too deep beneath time. Even after the birth of modern science, the mystery remains hidden. Early archaeologists searching caves across Europe occasionally recover strange bones that do not resemble those of living people. Sometimes they dismiss them as belonging to diseased individuals. Sometimes they attribute them to unusually robust ancient humans. In other cases, they are ignored altogether because no broader framework exists for understanding them. Then in the 19th century, a discovery inside Germany's Neander Valley begins changing everything. The unusual skull cap and limb bones recovered there immediately provoke debate. Some scholars believe they belong to a deformed modern human. Others argue they represent an extinct population unlike any living people. The scientific world remains divided for decades. Without additional discoveries, certainty proves impossible. Gradually, however, more evidence emerges. Similar fossils appear in Belgium, then France, then Croatia, then across much of Europe and Western Asia. Each new skeleton strengthens the conclusion that these remains belong not to isolated individuals, but to an entire population that once flourishes across an enormous region. Human evolution suddenly becomes far more complicated than anyone expects. The discoveries do not stop there. During the 20th century, excavations uncover increasingly ancient members of the human family across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Every decade seems to introduce another unexpected branch. Some species survive only briefly. Others endure for hundreds of thousands of years. The family tree expands steadily outward. Yet perhaps the greatest surprise arrives not from newly discovered bones, but from improved methods of studying old ones. Ancient DNA transforms fossils from silent objects into biological archives. Bones that sit inside museum collections for generations suddenly reveal entirely new stories. Relationships once inferred from anatomy alone can now be tested genetically. Long-standing assumptions are confirmed, revised, or abandoned. One remarkable example involves the first Neanderthal genome. When researchers successfully sequence substantial portions of Neanderthal DNA, expectations remain cautious. Many scientists assume that modern humans and Neanderthals separate completely after evolving along different paths. Instead, the results reveal shared ancestry far more recent than anticipated. Soon afterward comes the even greater shock. Living people outside Africa inherit measurable amounts of Neanderthal DNA. The extinct have never entirely disappeared. They survive inside us. Almost immediately, additional discoveries complicate the picture further. Denisovans emerge from genetic evidence. Hybrid individuals reveal direct relationships between different human groups. Ghost populations begin appearing through statistical patterns hidden inside living genomes. The deeper researchers investigate, the more crowded prehistory becomes. What once appears to be a simple evolutionary ladder now resembles a braided river whose channels repeatedly divide and merge. This scientific transformation also changes how archaeologists approach excavation. A cave is no longer simply a place to recover artifacts. Every grain of sediment may preserve environmental information. Every animal bone contributes clues about ancient climate. Microscopic pollen grains reveal changing vegetation. Chemical signatures expose seasonal occupations. Fragments of charcoal identify the species of wood burned around prehistoric hearths. Even the absence of certain materials becomes informative. Modern archaeology increasingly resembles forensic investigation. No single discovery tells the whole story. Instead, thousands of tiny observations accumulate into broader reconstructions. One overlooked stone flake may indicate where tools are manufactured. Animal tooth chemistry reveals seasonal migration. Mineral deposits inside caves record changing rainfall over thousands of years. The human story emerges gradually from the combined weight of countless details. Technology continues expanding these possibilities. High-resolution imaging allows researchers to examine fossils without damaging them. Three-dimensional scanning reconstructs crushed skulls digitally. Artificial intelligence assists in recognizing subtle anatomical patterns invisible to the naked eye. Satellite imagery identifies buried archaeological landscapes beneath forests and deserts. Ground-penetrating radar detects hidden structures before excavation even begins. Each innovation opens another window into deep time. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson learned from these advances is not technological at all. It is intellectual. Again and again, scientific history demonstrates that certainty about the distant past is often temporary. Ideas once accepted as unquestionable eventually require revision. Entire human species remain unknown until unexpectedly discovered. Ancient migrations invisible one decade become well documented the next. Scholars still debate numerous important questions. Exactly how many human species exist simultaneously? How frequently do different populations interbreed? Did unknown lineages survive far longer than current evidence suggests? How many archaeological sites remain beneath rising seas? What branches of humanity leave no fossils at all? The evidence remains incomplete, and researchers readily acknowledge those uncertainties. Far from weakening scientific understanding, this willingness to revise conclusions becomes one of its greatest strengths. Every new discovery is evaluated against existing evidence. Unsupported claims are tested rigorously. Extraordinary ideas require extraordinary proof. Popular speculation often races far ahead of the data. Stories about hidden civilizations, mysterious superhumans, or advanced lost technologies regularly capture public attention. The actual evidence tells a different story. Reality proves no less fascinating. Ordinary human communities adapting patiently across immense spans of time create a narrative richer than many myths. They survive repeated ice ages. They cross continents on foot. They navigate unfamiliar coastlines. They adapt to mountains, forests, deserts, and islands. Some disappear. Others leave descendants. Together they reveal that humanity's history is neither simple nor inevitable. As researchers continue uncovering forgotten chapters, one realization grows steadily stronger. The lost humans who vanished from our bloodline are not merely curiosities from distant prehistory. They are essential to understanding how our own species becomes what it is today. Their story is in many ways the missing beginning of ours. Every new discovery about our vanished relatives carries an unexpected consequence. The deeper scientists explore humanity's forgotten branches, the more difficult it becomes to define what it actually means to be human. For centuries, the answer appears obvious. Humans are assumed to be fundamentally different from every other living creature, and modern people are viewed as the clear endpoint of a long evolutionary journey. The extinct species that precede us are often imagined as imperfect attempts leading inevitably toward a final successful design. The evidence no longer supports that comforting picture. Instead of a single destination, evolution reveals countless possible paths. Each human lineage develops its own solutions to the challenges of survival. Neanderthals become masters of Ice Age Europe. Denisovans adapt to environments stretching from the frozen Altai Mountains to the high elevations of the Tibetan Plateau, and perhaps the tropical landscapes of Southeast Asia. The tiny humans of Flores thrive for tens of thousands of years on an isolated island where larger bodies offer no particular advantage. Modern humans expand across nearly every continent by combining biological flexibility with rapidly evolving culture. None of these paths is predetermined. Each represents a different answer to the same fundamental problem. How does a human population survive in an unpredictable world? For much of the 20th century, intelligence is often presented as the defining characteristic separating modern humans from all other relatives. That assumption gradually weakens. Neanderthals manufacture sophisticated stone tools for hundreds of thousands of years. They control fire with confidence. They hunt dangerous animals cooperatively. They care for injured companions and survive in some of the harshest climates occupied by any prehistoric humans. Denisovans pass on genetic adaptations that continue helping modern people survive at extreme altitudes. Even the diminutive inhabitants of Flores successfully exploit a difficult island environment over immense spans of time. Intelligence, it becomes clear, exists in many forms. Survival does not depend upon one universal measure of mental ability. It depends upon solving the problems presented by a particular environment. The same realization applies to technology. Modern society often associates progress with constant innovation, yet archaeological evidence demonstrates that many prehistoric populations maintain remarkably stable technologies for tens of thousands of years. This stability should not be mistaken for stagnation. If a hunting strategy continues working effectively generation after generation, radical change offers little advantage. Innovation becomes valuable primarily when circumstances demand it. Changing climates, new environments, different prey, unexpected challenges. In those moments, flexibility matters. The growing importance of culture introduces another profound shift. Unlike genetic evolution, which unfolds slowly across countless generations, culture can transform within a single lifetime. A successful technique spreads through observation. Children learn from experienced adults. Neighboring communities exchange ideas. Knowledge accumulates rather than beginning anew with every generation. This capacity allows modern humans to respond to rapidly changing conditions with unusual speed. Yet even here the distinction is not absolute. Increasing evidence suggests that Neanderthals also transmit knowledge culturally. Tool-making traditions persist across generations. Preferred hunting methods remain surprisingly consistent. Certain symbolic practices appear within widely separated communities. The difference may therefore lie not in the existence of culture but in its scale and connectivity. Larger social networks allow ideas to travel farther. Useful innovations spread more rapidly. Communities separated by hundreds of miles may still influence one another indirectly through chains of neighboring groups. One particularly fascinating consequence of ancient DNA research is the realization that our own bodies remain living archives of prehistoric encounters. Every person whose ancestry includes populations outside Africa carries inherited Neanderthal DNA. Many people in Asia and Oceania also possess Denisovan ancestry. These genetic fragments influence immune responses, metabolism, skin biology, adaptation to sunlight, and many other subtle characteristics. Most people never notice these inherited contributions. They are woven seamlessly into ordinary biology. The boundaries separating extinct humans from living ones become increasingly blurred. This realization challenges the traditional meaning of extinction itself. If genes continue surviving inside billions of modern people, can their original populations truly be considered entirely gone? The communities disappear, their languages vanish, their traditions are lost, yet pieces of their biological identity remain active within later generations. In that sense, humanity carries its own forgotten family wherever it goes. Researchers have also begun recognizing that evolution does not always reward apparent superiority. History often favors adaptability. A population perfectly suited to one environment may struggle when conditions change. Another group with broader dietary habits, larger social networks, or greater geographic range may survive not because its members are individually stronger, but because their society absorbs disruption more effectively. This lesson extends far beyond prehistory. Modern ecosystems reveal similar patterns repeatedly. Specialized species flourish under stable conditions. Generalists often prove more resilient during periods of rapid environmental change. The same principle may influence ancient human survival. One lesser-known area of research explores how childhood development differs among prehistoric humans. Growth patterns preserved within fossil teeth suggest that Neanderthals may mature at rates broadly comparable to modern humans, though subtle differences remain under investigation. Such findings remind researchers that these extinct relatives experience childhood learning and social development in ways perhaps more familiar than once imagined. Young Neanderthals almost certainly play. They observe adults making tools. They learn which plants are safe to eat. They accompany experienced hunters as they gradually acquire essential survival skills. These ordinary moments rarely survive in the archaeological record, yet they shape every generation. The more scientists reconstruct ancient lives, the harder it becomes to think of vanished human species as strangers. Their concerns are deeply recognizable. Finding food, protecting children, recovering from injury, preparing for winter, remembering familiar landscapes, caring for aging relatives. These are not uniquely modern experiences. They belong to humanity's shared inheritance. Scholars still debate many details. Exactly how similar are the minds of different human species? How extensive are their symbolic traditions? Do they tell stories around evening fires? Do they sing? Do they mark important life events with ceremonies now forever lost? The evidence remains incomplete. Some questions may never receive definitive answers. Even so, each new discovery narrows the emotional distance separating us from these forgotten relatives. The ancient human family begins to feel less like a collection of scientific names and more like a network of real communities whose lives unfold beneath the same stars that shine today. In understanding them more clearly, modern humanity gradually begins understanding itself in ways that would have seemed unimaginable only a generation ago. Standing in the modern world surrounded by cities, satellites, and digital networks that connect billions of people in an instant, it is tempting to imagine that humanity's survival has always been inevitable. Looking backward through history, the existence of our own species can appear almost predetermined, as though every earlier branch of the human family existed only to prepare the way for us. Deep Time tells a very different story. For most of human evolution, there is no obvious reason why Homo sapiens should become the final surviving lineage. There are periods when Neanderthals have occupied Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, demonstrating remarkable resilience through repeated ice ages. There are Denisovan populations spread across enormous regions of Asia, adapting to environments ranging from frozen mountains to high plateaus. There are isolated island communities evolving along entirely different paths, surviving in places that seem almost impossible to reach. If someone could travel back 100,000 years, the future would not be easy to predict. The world would contain several successful kinds of humans, each with strengths refined over immense stretches of time. Nothing would clearly identify one branch as the inevitable survivor. This realization changes the meaning of evolution itself. Evolution has no final goal. It does not work toward perfection. It has no preferred destination waiting at the end of history. Instead, every generation simply responds to the conditions it inherits. When environments remain stable, successful adaptations continue. When climates shift, coastlines move, or ecosystems transform, different qualities suddenly become valuable. What succeeds in one age may become a disadvantage in another. Modern humans benefit from extraordinary flexibility. They occupy deserts, rainforests, mountains, Arctic coastlines, islands, and open grasslands. They experiment continuously with new technologies, social structures, and methods of obtaining food. Perhaps most importantly, they create increasingly extensive networks through which information travels far beyond the experience of any single community. Knowledge itself becomes an evolutionary advantage. One hunting innovation developed hundreds of miles away can eventually improve survival elsewhere. One successful adaptation spreads culturally rather than genetically. This ability to accumulate knowledge across generations becomes one of humanity's defining characteristics. Yet it is worth remembering how fragile even this success remains. Genetic evidence indicates that modern humans themselves experienced severe population bottlenecks during parts of prehistory. At certain moments, the total number of breeding individuals may fall surprisingly low. Scholars continue debating the exact numbers and timing, but several studies suggest that our ancestors repeatedly approached dangerous demographic thresholds. The species that eventually populates every continent is not immune to extinction. It survives several moments when history could have unfolded very differently. Chance quietly accompanies every stage of the journey. A volcanic eruption occurring at a different time. A prolonged drought affecting crucial migration routes. An epidemic spreading through already vulnerable communities. Slightly lower birth rates over several generations. Any combination of these factors might have altered the balance between human populations in ways impossible to reconstruct today. The line separating survival from disappearance is often remarkably thin. This perspective encourages a different understanding of the vanished branches of our family. Rather than viewing them as failures, it becomes more accurate to see them as fellow survivors whose time simply ends earlier than ours. Neanderthals thrive for more than 300,000 years. That is an extraordinary evolutionary achievement. The Denisovans leave genetic adaptations still helping people thrive in difficult environments today. The inhabitants of Flores persist on an isolated island for tens of thousands of years, despite limited resources and repeated environmental change. Measured across evolutionary time, none of these populations can reasonably be called unsuccessful. Their disappearance reflects changing circumstances rather than the inherent inadequacy. One lesser-known insight emerges from ecological studies comparing extinct and surviving species. Researchers often find that extinction risk depends not only upon biological traits, but also upon geographic distribution. Species occupying broad ranges generally withstand local disasters more effectively than those restricted to small isolated regions. The same principle appears applicable to ancient humans. As populations become fragmented into scattered refuges, each local catastrophe carries greater consequences. Modern humans gradually expand across wider territories connected by broader social networks. Many other lineages do not. The contrast grows increasingly important over time. Another enduring lesson concerns diversity itself. For hundreds of thousands of years, humanity exists not as a single species, but as a collection of related populations exploring different evolutionary possibilities. Each contributes unique adaptations. Each reveals another way of solving the challenges posed by changing climates, unfamiliar landscapes, and unpredictable ecosystems. Their collective history demonstrates that diversity has always been one of humanity's defining characteristics. The disappearance of those branches represents not only biological loss, but also the disappearance of countless perspectives on surviving the world. Their languages vanish. Their stories vanish. Their traditions disappear beyond recovery. Only scattered traces remain. A stone tool shaped by experienced hands. A healed fracture revealing years of care from companions. A tooth preserving ancient DNA. A footprint pressed into soft mud beside those of long-extinct animals. Each fragment carries extraordinary weight because so much else has been lost. Modern science continues searching patiently for these fragments. New caves are explored. Submerged coastlines are mapped. Ancient sediments are analysed for microscopic traces of DNA. Improved dating techniques refine chronologies once considered settled. The picture continues evolving with every major discovery. Scholars still debate fundamental questions. How many undiscovered human populations remain hidden in Africa? Did additional island lineages evolve independently before rising seas erased their habitats? How many ghost populations survive only through faint genetic echoes? Will future excavations reveal branches of humanity nobody has yet imagined? The evidence remains incomplete. That incompleteness is not a weakness. It is an invitation. Every unanswered question reminds us that the story of human evolution is still being written. Unlike the civilizations recorded in written history, the deepest chapters of humanity's past remain scattered beneath deserts, glaciers, forests, caves, and ocean floors. Some pages have already been recovered. Many more almost certainly remain hidden. As the search continues, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Modern humans are not the culmination of an orderly march toward perfection. We are simply the last visible branch of a once vast family whose history is richer, stranger, and far more interconnected than anyone believed only a few decades ago. The final chapter belongs not to triumph alone, but to remembrance. In the end, the greatest mystery surrounding the lost humans who vanished from our bloodline is not simply why they disappeared. It is why enough of their story survives for us to find it all. The odds have always been overwhelmingly against them. A body left on an open plain disappears with astonishing speed. Scavengers scatter bones across the landscape. Rain carries away loose soil. Roots split buried skeletons. Rivers grind fragile remains into gravel. Entire coastlines sink beneath rising seas. Volcanoes bury valleys beneath ash before erosion slowly exposes them again tens of thousands of years later. Time itself works patiently against memory, erasing almost everything that once seemed permanent, and yet somehow traces remain. A child's finger bone preserved inside a Siberian cave, a jaw resting for more than 100,000 years beneath the Tibetan plateau, tiny footprints hardened into ancient mud before being covered by volcanic sediment, stone blades abandoned after an ordinary hunting trip that never entered written history because writing itself did not yet exist, fragments of charcoal from forgotten campfires, invisible strands of DNA locked inside fossilized teeth. Each discovery is unimaginably unlikely. Together they reconstruct one of the most extraordinary stories science has ever uncovered. That story continues changing with every passing decade. Only a generation ago, most people learned a version of human evolution that now seems remarkably simple. A few familiar ancestors appeared one after another before finally giving rise to modern humanity. Neanderthals occupied a small side branch. Everything else seemed relatively straightforward. Today the picture has become almost unrecognizable. The human family tree resembles a dense woodland rather than a single trunk. Branches divide repeatedly. Some survive for hundreds of thousands of years before ending abruptly. Others reconnect after long periods of separation through interbreeding. Still others remain known only through faint genetic echoes hidden inside living populations. Entire lineages almost certainly remain undiscovered. The more scientists investigate, the less likely it seems that the current picture is complete. Perhaps this should not surprise us. Human evolution unfolds across millions of years. Modern archaeology has existed for little more than a century. Ancient DNA research has transformed the field only within the last few decades. Measured against the immense span of prehistory, humanity has only just begun searching seriously for its own forgotten relatives. Future discoveries may prove as surprising as those already made. Some may emerge from caves hidden beneath tropical forests where preservation has been unexpectedly favorable. Others may come from underwater archaeology as technology improves, revealing settlements drowned when Ice Age coastlines disappeared beneath rising seas. Still others may appear through methods not yet imagined. Science has repeatedly demonstrated that every improvement in technology reveals evidence previously thought impossible to recover. What survives in the record suggests that many chapters remain unread. There is another reason these discoveries matter. They reshape the way modern people understand themselves. For centuries, humanity often imagines itself standing apart from nature, unique and fundamentally isolated. The existence of our lost relatives tells another story. We are connected not only to living life, but also to a remarkable family whose members solve the challenges of survival in many different ways. Some master frozen Europe, others adapt to remote islands. Some flourish in high mountain plateaus where oxygen is scarce. Others navigate expanding grasslands or dense forests. Together they demonstrate the astonishing flexibility already present within the human family long before civilization begins. Their disappearance also offers a quiet warning. Extinction is not always dramatic. It rarely arrives with clear boundaries announcing its approach. More often it advances gradually through changing climates, shrinking populations, environmental instability, and simple demographic chance. Communities continue living ordinary lives while larger patterns unfold beyond their awareness. No Neanderthal parent knows they belong to one of the last generations. No Denisovan hunter realizes that only fragments of his DNA will survive into the distant future. History almost never announces its endings. That lesson extends far beyond prehistory. Modern civilization often assumes permanence because its achievements appear immense. Cities cover continents, aircraft cross oceans in hours, satellites circle the planet, digital networks connect billions of people. Yet the story of the lost humans reminds us that survival has never been guaranteed. Every successful population inherits not certainty but possibility. The future remains open. Perhaps the greatest gift left by our vanished relatives is perspective. They remind us that humanity has always been larger than memory. The people living today represent only one surviving expression of a family that once stretched across continents, climates, and hundreds of thousands of years. Within our bodies remain inherited fragments of ancient encounters. Within caves and forgotten sediments remain fragments of ancient lives. Within science remains the determination to continue searching. The mystery is therefore not ending, it is deepening. Every excavation uncovers new questions. Every genetic sequence reveals unexpected relationships. Every fossil discovered beneath layers of ancient earth adds another voice to a conversation interrupted tens of thousands of years ago. The silence surrounding our lost relatives is gradually giving way to understanding. Not complete understanding. Perhaps that will never be possible. Too much has vanished forever. Too many coastlines lie beneath the sea. Too many bones have turned to dust. Too many stories disappear without language or writing to preserve them. Yet enough survives to remind us of something profound. Modern humanity does not stand alone at the summit of history. It stands at the end of an ancient gathering whose members have almost all departed. The campfires that once burned across prehistoric landscapes belong to many kinds of humans. Today only one remains visible. The others survive in scattered bones, hidden genes, forgotten landscapes, and the growing determination of science to remember those whom time almost erased completely. The landscape grows quieter as the story reaches its end. The last campfire belonging to another human species burns somewhere beyond the edge of memory, unnoticed by anyone except the people gathered around it. They prepare food, mend tools worn smooth by years of use. Watch children drift towards sleep and look up at the same stars that still shine above the earth today. Nothing about that evening tells them they are living through the closing pages of an entire branch of humanity. Time continues without pause. Winter gives way to spring. Forests reclaim abandoned clearings. Rivers carry away footprints pressed into soft mud. Coastlines slowly change shape until familiar paths disappear beneath rising seas. Mountains weather grain by grain while the traces of countless generations settle, quietly beneath layers of soil. The world does not stop to mark the passing of a people. Nature simply folds their story into the landscape. Much later, another kind of human walks those same valleys without knowing who has come before. New languages fill the air. Villages become towns, and towns become cities. Empires rise, fall, and are forgotten in their turn. Yet beneath every road, beneath every field, and beneath every quiet cave lies the possibility that another fragment of the ancient family still waits to be found. Perhaps that is the most enduring lesson left by the lost humans who vanished from our bloodline. History is never as complete as it appears. The past is not a finished book resting safely on a shelf. It is a manuscript with missing pages, blurred sentences, and entire chapters waiting beneath stone ice forests, deserts, and the floor of the sea. Every generation uncovers a few more words, but the story remains wonderfully unfinished. The people who disappeared are no longer strangers. They become companions across deep time, reminding us that survival is never guaranteed, and that existence itself is shaped by countless moments of chance, adaptation, resilience, and quiet perseverance. Though their names are forever lost, their presence lingers in the landscapes they once crossed, in the fragments of DNA carried by millions of people today, and in the growing understanding that humanity was once far richer and more diverse than anyone imagined. As the last light fades from this long journey into the distant past, the earth seems almost unchanged. The wind still moves through ancient valleys. Rivers still follow familiar courses toward the sea. Above them all, the stars remain patient witnesses, shining over every generation that has ever lived, every branch that has flourished, and every one that has quietly slipped into memory. Among them, only one human lineage still looks back and wonders about all the others.